Well, now during this segment of Dr. J Answers, I want to look back on last week's material talking about polygamy in the Bible. And so I've invited onto this segment my friend, Dante Stack. He is an author, abstract thinker, and he calls himself a desperate believer. And he's lived across the globe. He's a good friend of mine, a nice thinker as well. He loves studying ancient Near Eastern cultures and religious beliefs and sort of has a knack for exploring all sorts of things. On YouTube, he gave me some beef for my comments last week, so we're here to talk about it mano a mano. Welcome back to Veracity Hill. You made an appearance in the first season, as I recall. Didn't I interview you, I think, for one of those episodes? Dante?
You did. Thank you for bringing me on.
Yes. So welcome back to the program.
And yes, I have a beef with you. Man. All right. I want to go through, if it's all right with you, I want to go through your response to the meme that was shared by the Bible for Normal People.
Yes.
And go through kind of what you said, the points you were trying to make, the Bible verses, and then I have my own Bible verses to throw in there. My beef really with your presentation was you started out by saying, nowhere in biblical text is polygamy supported or promoted. That was your bar. So if I can get above that bar, then I can win.
Yeah. I agree to your terms. Yes.
All right. Now, so that's bar one. Now I'm also creating a lower bar for myself, which I think I can probably win you over, is that your proof text or your main text you were using, 2 Samuel, is not a good text to use to make your case. I can make a strong case there, maybe a weaker case for what the Bible has to say about polygamy. And my main thing is, man, this is tough. This is a tough text, and I didn't feel like you gave it, or not text, tough topic, sex in general in the Bible, and marriage as well. And I didn't think you gave it enough gravity.
So what I would say is the passage, I think it was 2 Samuel 12, I wouldn't use that as a go-to text to support monogamy. The question was regarding that meme, if I remember correctly, how should we interpret that passage in that text? And so if I remember correctly, the woman who shared her thoughts on that passage, and that was shared by the Bible for Normal People, she was basically saying, well, evangelicals today, monogamy, this and that, and then, quotes David, I had many wives, this and that. So it should be obvious that there are Old Testament figures that have multiple wives. I mean, it's strewn about throughout the narratives of the Old Testament texts. So the question is, how do we interpret those passages? And my contention is that these passages are descriptive. They are not prescriptive. And as such,
okay, all right.
Yeah. So as such, I don't think that Yahweh promotes or supports polygamy, but rather that he has permitted it for the sake of his people. He's willing to work with them. He's permitted it. And for many of these guys, it was a status symbol, right? For many of these leaders, these ancient Near Eastern leaders, not just the Israelites, but you see this as a status symbol, and there are warnings against it. And the narratives themselves provide a warning against it. So that's sort of my contention.
Okay, all right. Well, let's take a look at that. You said this last week. The instances of polygamy are descriptive, not prescriptive. So there's another situation. If I can find a prescription for polygamy, then I would win. And then second, you said God's permitted, or is it fair to say allowed?
Yeah, that's right. So, and again, an allowance or a permission to me is different than a support or promotion of an ethical value.
Agreed.
Okay.
So the first text you pointed to, actually, before you went to 2 Samuel, you went to Deuteronomy 17:17,
which is the warning.
Which I pulled up.
Yeah.
I wanted to pull this up. It's not really evidence for my case, but again, I think it's a weak case you're making trying to use this text. So this is the warning about kings. Deuteronomy 17:17. My translation just that I pulled up on Bible Gateway says NIV, so we're rolling with that.
Sure.
He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Now, one is talking about kings, not talking about everybody. So it is, once again, it's a warning specified for kings. Where we really come into trouble there is that word many. What does many mean? Does that mean 2? Does that mean 3? Or does that mean a profundity of wives?
Like Solomon.
11:3, I think. 1 Kings 11:3, I think, speaks to this. In talking about Solomon, it says he, Solomon, had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. Now, another translation I was reading earlier said it led his heart astray, or something to that effect, which sounds directly like a parallel, right? When the guy who's writing First Kings is writing, he's got Deuteronomy on his left, because he is clearly talking about, hey, Moses gave us this warning, boom, Solomon broke it. And many wives, we know, at least our one context of that meant 700. Not 2, not 3, not 4.
But remember the warning in Deuteronomy 17:17. There is one assumption in our conversation, and I don't know exactly where you stand on this. I would hold to an earlier dating of Deuteronomy. I don't think Deuteronomy was written during the exile or post-exile as part of like this composition of multiple sources, right? Documentary hypothesis. I know it's kind of, we're going a little weeds deep here, but I'm assuming that Deuteronomy was written before First Kings. It is a warning and includes all the kings, not just Solomon. But we also see, when we look at David, I think it caused problems for him having many wives. Amber in our comments says, none of these characters in polygamy had that work out very well for them, right? So that's my take, that in the OT, we see these problems arise for these men. Not just that they would be led astray, like Solomon had been led astray, but that it would just create family drama. There's favoritism amongst the wives. There's favoritism amongst the children of specific wives. As the Bible describes the context of polygamy, it itself serves as a warning against it because it does create problems. That's why I interpret the Old Testament text as being descriptive and not promoting and supporting polygamy, but rather it demonstrates an allowance or permission for it for those people in that time. Now, that's also important as an incrementalist, getting back to the Randall Rouser thing, because I see that Yahweh works with people where they're at and that there is moral progress. And my larger critique of Randall was that he cannot evaluate the Old Testament text without the moral progress that we have made in the course of human history. He's sawing off the branch that he sits on, right? You can't critique the OT unless you've come afar and had moral improvement, which proves incrementalism, which was my other point. But, okay, back to our OT discussion here.
When we get to the end of this here, I don't know much about incrementalism. I'll have some follow-up questions as to why did God choose incremental moral truth in this area and not this area? It seems like a sticky wicket. But let's get into 2 Samuel 12:8, because that was where you spent the majority of your time. And you said, hey, 2 Samuel 12:8, that verse in particular, is used by people who claim the Bible supports polygamy as their proof text, but they didn't use the larger context. And the larger context is Nathan is talking to David about how he took Uriah's wife Bathsheba. I think you missed it on this one. This is not a text about polygamy at all. David sleeps with Bathsheba. That is breaking.
He's committed adultery. He has slept with a married woman.
Right. Levitical law says, and I had that text somewhere in my notes, but I'm not seeing it as I'm dancing through this page with my eyes. Levitical law says both Bathsheba and David deserve death. This is a text about you broke the friggin' law. You deserve to die. This is not about polygamy. In fact, when we go back to the context, starting in verse 7, then Nathan said to David, you are the man. You took that man's rubber ducky.
Okay.
Why? Because you didn't like yesterday's rubber duckies.
Yeah, we've got
This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. All right, so here Nathan's quoting God.
Hang on. You just
said, I anointed you king over Israel.
Yeah, you said something. The rubber duckies, it's great. So the parable is about a rich man.
Everyone gets that reference.
Yeah. The parable is about a rich man who's got a lot of cattle and sheep, and instead of sacrificing one of his own from his own flock, he takes from a poor man. Right? This is the parable. So you said you didn't play with the other rubber duckies I gave you, which is itself an implicit critique of polygamy, because it's saying that all of these other wives you had weren't good enough. That is the implicit meaning of the parable.
No. Let's hear what God says. He says, when Nathan is quoting him, he says, I anointed you king over Israel. I being God, right? I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. Now, you did not deal with that text. You just went on to the implicit meaning. But God is saying, I gave you those wives.
Yeah.
I gave you all of Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, and the wives being part of it, if all these wives had been too little, I would have given you even more. So how do you get around that? God gave David wives, plural. That seems like support and promotion to me. How can God give something that he doesn't support?
This is a great question, but I really don't think it defeats my position, because when God allows or permits something, he's willing to still play within those rules. So as a permission, as a permittance, God in his providence plays within those rules of permittance. So we could say that in the ancient Near Eastern context that God gave people slaves, right, as, say, prisoners of war when you're looking at the Old Testament type of slavery. But does that mean that God condones and supports slavery? We wouldn't quite say that. At least I don't think we would. I'd say rather that God worked with these humans in that time and place, in their socio contexts, so God doesn't support or condone, but rather works within. He works within those contexts. So that's where, when we come across this verse in 2 Samuel, I'd say, yeah, God says he would give him more in the rules of what God has created and allows. So part of God's general providence, you could even say. What do you think on that? So if I told you I'm going to permit you to go buy whatever candy you want.
No, not permit. I am giving you whatever candy I want.
Yeah. So imagine I build a store and said, Dante, I'll give you whatever candy you want. And you pick 3 candy bars, and then you steal your buddies. And I say, well, look, I built this store for you. At this present time, it's full of candy bars. I would have been willing to give you 5 more candy bars. Why'd you take your buddy's candy bar, right? Same sort of thing, where I think there are temporary purposes in Yahweh's goals of global dominion, long-term goals. And so he's willing to work with people where they're at. So in that same way, I mean, would we say that Yahweh supports giving everybody as many candy bars as they want? No, that's not quite right. I don't think that's a nuanced enough take on the situation. So, getting back to the verse here, how are we to understand when Yahweh says he would give David more wives? Does that mean Yahweh, as sort of an objective measure, supports polygamy? And I think no. I think we do see that shift occur in the New Testament covenant. You see it in Jesus and in Paul, I would argue. So we might ask ourselves this: Dante, do you think that Christians should be polygamists, or has that now been done away with? And if so, when did that shift occur?
That feels like a little bit of whataboutism, and maybe that's not the right terminology, but I'm not here to be like, hey, let's all be Mormon, let's all get boogie with it and have 40 wives. That's not what I'm saying. But I think it's like, okay, if you're playing this nuanced game of God says he gives you things that he allows but doesn't actually like. And yet God is so on top of minutia and cares so deeply in Levitical law about things that we don't give a darn about anymore. But this thing that still holds a huge measure of distinction for us today and is wildly important to us both now and then, why didn't God have more to say about this? If he tacitly was okay with it, but wanted to incrementally move us away from it, throw me a line, man. And by man, I mean God, my Savior, Almighty. I think your objection would be, this is a cultural thing. It's a part of not just the customs, but how women have security. It's a patriarchal ancient Near East.
Yep.
So having a second wife is giving that woman a chance. Often. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm game to say I think that what you said accurately reflects the context of the Old Testament. Yeah.
So then I want to point us to Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14.
Is this, maybe I'm thinking of the Exodus 21 passage. Sorry, you said Deuteronomy.
Yeah, we got Exodus 21, 10. That one.
Some of the laws repeated, yeah.
Exodus 21, 10. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights.
Right.
Okay, that fits in with the idea of, okay, God allowed polygamy because that was actually what was better for women.
Now polygamy has to be regulated because he's allowed it. And what's happened here, the reason why this law exists, as I like to remind people, the law exists because it was real people having real problems. So a real problem would be that a man would marry a woman, he'd find another woman to marry, and he'd neglect the first wife, right? There was favoritism. So what do? Well, you got to make a law making sure that other wife is protected and cared for.
So with that in mind, Deuteronomy 21, starting in verse 10, when you go to war against your enemies, I'm assuming here we could also assume that enemies would also mean foreigners. So when you go to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she pleases. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. So this text, I think, kind of breaks that argument that the allowance for polygamy was merely about the way the system was, right? With you got to care for women. No, this is about, hey, that lady's sexy. God's saying, yeah, you just took over this territory. You want that sexy lady? Go, take her. It's a tough thing. And then if we had any doubt that this was about polygamy, verse 15 then goes into talking about what to do if you have two wives.
Yeah, so the verse about here, the foreign female captives, I think does support my point. If you go to war against your enemies, meaning you've killed the men, what are to become of these women, right? Again, patriarchal
society. The emphasis is because she's pretty. Take her because she's pretty.
It's sort of a laissez-faire. It's a laissez-faire approach. It's a laissez-faire approach to social.
So God only cares for women that are pretty? What about the uggos?
Well, I mean,
what about the uggos? Right? Because it's not God caring for the women.
There are men to also care for those women.
Then stipulate that. Why? I mean, this seems like on the surface, hey, men, you like them women, go get them. It's okay. We got some rules and we got some boundaries.
Yeah, so
have at it.
I'm certainly not denying that there is an attractiveness aspect here to this regulation, but the purpose for the regulation was the welfare of women whose husbands had just been killed in battle. How are women like that to care for themselves, their children, etc.? This is one of the ways, among other ways, that Yahweh has ordered the ancient society to care for those women. There were no taxes, there was no welfare system, right? So it's not like they could just be given some money. There was no system like that for caring for people who were poor and in need. So how do you create a welfare system in this society? And my contention is simply that you see moral progress occurring. You see moral progress when you look at the Israelites compared to other A&E societies, and there is development. Was it perfect? No, not at all. Do we think that by our standards today they fell short? Yes, we would say that. But I think
this isn't them falling short. It would be God falling short.
No, because God works with people where they're at in their societies today. We have laws today that people 300 years from now are probably going to laugh at us for, but which we think today reflects proximate justice, the pursuit of justice, getting close enough. But people are going to laugh at us for the regulations we have.
Okay, but again then, all right, easy fix on this one. I'm going to go straight to verse 28 of Deuteronomy 22. If a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, or he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. We kill a man if he sleeps with another married man, but not for the virgin. God doesn't seem to care about the plight of women in these verses.
No. I think he does. So I think this verse...
So why not? The woman's father gets the 50 shekels and he gets stoned. Why not that for raping someone?
Well, so this verse in particular, right? If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and sees her and lies with her. So the question here on this regulation is also a reflection on the father of the young woman and the father's role in ensuring that his daughters are protected and cared for. So I think this is also a reflection on fathers, that they are to prevent this from happening. And this is...
the father makes out good here. He gets 50 shekels.
I'd have to do my currency exchange rate to see how much 50 shekels, was back then.
And then his daughter is married off. Also a potential benefit.
Could be. I will fight tooth and nail that 2 Samuel 12 is an implicit condemnation on polygamy, but I don't know that your case is yet to be made. We'll have to probably bring you back on here, that Yahweh supports and condones, promotes polygamy in the Old Testament. Rather, I think it's permitted and allowed, and God works within that, regulates it, etc. Remember, we've got that warning in Deuteronomy 17:17 about a king pursuing more wives, and then in 2 Samuel 12, there's the verse you brought up about Yahweh saying, I would have provided more wives, right? The issue doesn't...
Yes, that's for my point.
But I think you could almost read that as a sarcastic, that it wouldn't have been enough. Even if he had more women, he still would have wanted Bathsheba.
I hear the point you're making, and I'm not saying polygamy is good. I just don't understand sex in the Old Testament in general. I don't understand the incrementalism. I don't understand why texts aren't more just.
Yeah, well, and again, so the incrementalism is that there has been moral progress made. I mean, I don't think you could doubt that. You haven't doubted moral progress has been made. So the question is, how do we then evaluate the people whose shoulders we stand upon over the centuries, right? Where we are today is...
But we're not talking about standing on their shoulders. We're talking about standing on God's shoulders.
Ultimately as the source, yes. But I don't think if God presented 21st century moral regulations to a multi-thousand year before Christ society, that wouldn't have even translated to those people because the world was just so different. The question is then, how do we morally evaluate that society? In any society, I think we should almost do a case study by separating ourselves from the Israelites and look at other societies and try to understand those societies and understand why they had their laws and regulations. And we might come away thinking, golly, they did the best they could. They could have done better, but they pursued proximate justice. That's kind of basically my position, rather than an approach that says, like Rouser, that these are great moral evils that were regulated and allowed to happen. It's a tricky subject for sure, but again, we're doing the best we can. We are striving for truth. We are trying to clarify the complex issues, and it's hard when we live so far away from the cultural time that the Israelites lived in. So we've got to do our best.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me yell at you. Appreciate you, and thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Dante. We'll bring you on again, I'm sure, in the future. Thanks so much for coming on.